Good afternoon. Yeah, I am thrilled to introduce Andy Sauerwein this afternoon, the award winner, and for the Mississippi Humanities Council Award. And also thrilled that greeting us will be Emil Wilson, a graduate. So this is all a Belhaven family affair, but I have really enjoyed getting to know Andy, to listen to his compositions, to have some in-depth conversations with him, and particularly to think about creativity and imagination, and also to appreciate how Andy works in such a collaborative, interdisciplinary way, which is really how I think God has created us to work together. So Emil, I'll let you bring a greeting for us, and Andy, thanks.
My name's Emil Wilson, and I'm an alumni of Belhaven and serve on the board for the Mississippi Humanities Council, which is happy to be here presenting the Humanities Teacher Award to Dr. Sauerwein. In fact, I think I remember your first year here at Belhaven. I don't remember what year that was.
Fall of 2005.
There you go.
Watching you acting
There you go. Yes, and stage managing and working with Joe and that whole season. I remember that era, and I remember the impact that you had coming in and bringing a new perspective on exactly what Dr. Smith was talking about, this collaborative concept for composition and for the humanities. And that's important for the Humanities Council, is seeing that level of collaboration. In the end, that it is collaboration such as engineering. In the end, it is collaboration that gives us our greatest strengths in academia. And we're excited, that we're able to give these awards that cross many disciplines, whether it's philosophy or music or theater or even into the sciences. They all touch on the humanities because they all touch on what it means to be human. And as we move forward in life and in society, the advances that come in technology, the advances that come in social theory, everything will raise many questions that can't be answered simply by mathematics or by facts, but have to be answered by the humanities, by the sense of what it means to be human. And we at the Humanities Council are excited to help bring some of those discussions into the public eye. The Humanities Teacher Awards is a major part of that. As part of this, you will be invited to our annual awards dinner, April 5th, and we'd invite other people to join, where Dr. Sauerwein will be among humanities teachers from all over the state that are honored, as well as people who have contributed in some major way to the humanities throughout the state. So we are here to recognize not just the scholarship, but the scholarship that is brought outside of the walls of the academy and into the public. And that's the major goal of the Humanities Council, is to breach that academic public divide and bring humanities academic quality content to the general public. Is what good are the humanities, what good are those values that we learn if we don't take them outside of the academy and bring them into the public eye? So that's a major part of what we recognize here with the awards and what we as a council are dedicated to. One of those events I'd invite everyone to tonight at Hal and Mal's. There is a discussion. We have a regular event called Ideas on Tap, which is largely held at Hal and Mal's. And we will have humanities scholars on a panel discussing criminal justice reform. And this is a pretty regular event that we have at least once a month here at Hal and Mal's, and then throughout the state and other places where we can bring humanities scholars into public arenas and talk about public-based issues. The Humanities Council is an independent nonprofit organization, and we're supported largely by the National Endowment for the Humanities, along with grants from private foundations, corporations, and individuals. So that is our story. We'd love for all of you to be more involved. We have lots of opportunities for public engagement through things like Ideas on Tap, and for cross-pollination, where through programs like our Speakers Bureau, we're able to get humanities scholars like Dr. Sauerwein, who, if you're not on the Speakers Bureau, would love for you to apply. We can bring humanities scholars into the public, but also into other universities, so that there's some cross-pollination, cross-discussion of ideas. And we appreciate all of you being here to support Dr. Sauerwein. We're excited to be a part of this. Thank you. Dr. Sauerwein, take it away.
Well, thanks to the Humanities Council, thanks to the university for having some faith in my presence among you. I'm excited to be able to talk about things in a small way. From what Emil is saying, it sounds like we have a big program going here. And my sense of what I'm doing is really just talking out of the classroom, talking out of the position that I'm in, working with students on a regular basis and seeing outside of that to some degree. So I trust and hope that you will find this exploration worthwhile. I'm going to be talking specifically about music, of course, but I hope that it goes beyond that in your imagination. And I'll start with this question. So what is the value of a college music department? We have that in front of us all the time these days with changes in the way higher education is working and lots of other kinds of questions from the outside pushing on us. And Belhaven is known for its fine arts, so we have a vested interest in this idea of this is important, but what really is the value of it? What should it look like, and where does that go? So we could develop this question in a stereotypical direction. Why should we sustain an academic fine arts program that is expensive to run, spends a lot of time with music of the past, and doesn't offer students obvious lucrative job prospects? The practical concern driving these questions are not without merit, but they invite a negative stance which implicitly claims job readiness, economic utility, and present-day consumer tastes as the most important criteria for determining value and worth. We could answer these questions directly in several ways. As a single example, since I don't want to dwell on this for a long time, students majoring in music develop a variety of skills which make them eminently employable in a variety of fields. They apply thoughtful, practical, creative process on a daily basis. They learn positive, productive collaboration skills and practice making responsible, disciplined individual contributions to group projects. They learn to grasp and navigate complex networks of relationships. They practice being conscientiously attentive to significant detail in their work. They learn to integrate philosophical and conceptual concerns with practical and technical issues in projects. They develop the ability to perceive, understand, pursue, and realize complex objectives. They practice a persistent pursuit of multifaceted excellence in craftsmanship, design concepts, technical facility, personal integrity and responsibility, relationships, and so forth. They learn to acquire new skills, solve technical problems, and refine their performance as a matter of routine. All of these things are invaluable in the job market. However, Belhaven University's mission and vision lead the question in another, more radically significant direction, and that's what I'm interested in talking about. Music is already regarded by many of us as a fundamental part of being human, individually and corporately. It is a sign of life, a means of realizing identity, and a way of connecting and feeling validated. Stereotypically, we view music and the arts in general as essential food for the human spirit and a universal phenomenon in human culture around the world. Some would even say that music is a universal language, though such an idea distorts the nature of music and leads us to some false expectations about it. The biblical account places music near the center of our worship and our practice of life. You might permit me a single illustration from Ephesians 5:15-20, and you'll see that on your cute handout with the cute picture, which we'll talk about eventually. At the bottom of the page, Ephesians 5, saying, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit." And this is the point. "Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ." So here's Paul talking about how we should live, and he puts musical practice in the center of that as a way of us relating to one another and to him as something significant and important. And this puts music in a hopeful place. But in spite of this hopeful outlook, in practice, we experience a fair amount of conflict and controversy over musical preferences. People disagree about what they like, what constitutes good or valuable music, which musical styles they identify with, how much they should pay or get paid for it, how to succeed in the arts marketplace, who the best musicians are, and so forth. These concerns are not without merit, of course, and we might even take the competition as a sign of the richness of human life and diversity. Even if some of us are not so combative about our musical tastes, however, I think it is reasonable to say that we can easily be preoccupied with satisfying our own musical appetites, and that we implicitly feel no obligation to answer for the music we prefer, as long as we let others alone with their own musical tastes. After observing my own inner tendencies, sometimes with distress, I would guess that we tend to tacitly, implicitly believe that our own musical affections are superior to anyone else's, even when we publicly intend to validate the musical values of others, or at least permit them to maintain their taste without condemnation. This kind of attitude is widely accepted, I think, in our present-day consumer-oriented culture. Well, the Russian composer and pianist Sergei Prokofiev had little good to say about the prevailing attitude of his American audiences in the earlier part of the 20th century. Having concertized in various parts of Europe and throughout the United States, he came to observe a radical difference between listeners on either side of the Atlantic. In his estimation, Russian and European audiences took a personal interest in the culture of new music and showed evident care for the quality and character of composers' work. Americans, however, demonstrated that they were only interested in being excited or entertained, with little regard for the substance or quality of the music itself. He apparently, and understandably, preferred the involved interest present in old world culture to the consumerism he encountered in the new world. And while it might be entertaining to disparage American consumerism further, it's a nice national pastime, I think, I would rather pursue a positive, generative approach. Instead of persuasively working to define and justify my particular musical affections for your approval, I'm interested in fostering a practice of communal cultural engagement with music in which we can collectively and constructively step past conflict, alienation, and indifference in order to find a more nurturing kind of communal life around music. I propose that we move beyond just consuming music and participate in an invested exploration of the true, the good, and the beautiful in the music-making process. My hope is that cultural practices of musical curiosity, exploration, and discovery will in turn foster a healthier, life-giving, diverse musical culture in which we can connect and commune with one another for the common good of our human spirits. It will help us to accomplish this if we can sort out how such participatory exploratory music making actually works. In keeping with my express purpose to foster cultural renewal, I would mostly stick to my own experience here with studying music, composing it, making it, listening to it, teaching, interacting with friends and colleagues, and struggling with my own tendencies toward consumerism. I wish to be relationally present in this discussion as a participant rather than merely a presumed expert, such that we are considering this together from the outset. So this is a group project. This is not just about my interesting ideas, if indeed they are interesting. And given the limits of the present moment, I will not be terribly thorough. Instead, I hope I can outline an essential picture of my perspective as the beginning of what could become an ongoing conversation. And thus the title of this, The Pursuit of Radical Music Making. Okay. So on to business here. What I mean to consider is embedded in the title of this talk. Allow me to take these terms out of order. Rather than simply talking about music in some generic way, I choose the term music making to emphasize that music is essentially a present act of making. And as I talk through this, you can refer to my cutely drawn little chart of the integration of composer, performer, and listener. We typically treat music as the audio file we download or the playlist on our preferred audio streaming service, or we can take it to be the score to follow while performing, or the CD we own, or vinyl or cassette in case you are of some age, or the video we are watching on YouTube. We often figuratively refer to music using the name of the artist responsible for the sonic artifact of music making, the name of the composer, for instance. Whatever the case, the sonic artifact of music making, the sound itself, can be preserved in a variety of ways for us to recover and imaginatively reconstruct. But the music exists only in the moment of its reconstruction. This is much like a book, which is not effectively present until I actually start reading it, or a pizza, which offers me no real benefit until I begin to take bites out of it. What I wish to explore then is music being made in the here and now, and this is what this little picture is about. This requires the present creative activity of three kinds of music makers to bring it about: composers, performers, and listeners. And I think if you look at your picture, you can see how each of those are involved. Here's the composer thinking about a musical idea and speaking out, if you will, a musical score. Here's a performer looking at the score and trying to think of the same musical idea, although it's a little bit different color, and in turn making sound. And then here's the listener looking at the performer and listening to the sound, and also trying to think of the musical idea. And this big yellow line that goes through the whole thing, emphasizing the transmission from one side to the other, and how variable that might be. The musical architecture the composer has designed is only a blueprint, a recipe, until the performer makes the plan into a reality by the act of physically making sound in an actual space at a particular time, with the listener present to hear, see, and interpret the experience as an organized musical expression in which what the composer presumably intended is represented through the performer's activity, so that the listener can decode the design and reconstruct the composer's inner impulse. This impulse is what composer Roger Sessions has described as the inner gesture of the spirit that resonates with the movement of music. Okay. So in this picture, we see something a lot more complex than just I am hearing sound, and I am having a transparent experience of it. It's an elaborate kind of process that requires a great deal of thought and consideration, which we normally do kind of automatically. Okay? The process is understandably complex, and we could be easily distracted by questions about how reliably ideas can be communicated and understood between participants in this process. My point, though, is that the music I am talking about, and what we're going to be discussing, is that collaborative, participatory experience of music being made in the moment, which radiates out to encompass the entire process of bringing a musical expression to life. And it does involve not just composer and performer, but listeners. That's the biggest group of music makers in the equation, by far. Okay. And it involves less then a moment the instant sound is made, it is already vanishing. And all we have left are its traces. Of its traces, it leaves on our memory of senses interpreted and perceived. However, this is the moment which grounds the complex system of relationships between composer, performer, and listener, between motion, thought, and sentiment, and between form and meaning. The communication process seems transparent even while the ideas leading up to it and the effects and artifacts left behind have a persistent presence and reality. So when I refer to music or music making, this is what I have in mind. By the way, the model at hand is not specific to so-called new music. I mean, if you know that I am a composer and was involved in the Jackson New Music Festival and so on, you may be thinking, well, he's coming from that point of view of weird concert music, and it really doesn't apply to anything else. Music in any genre, style, or tradition comes to life in the moment of its making. So our present consideration is not restricted to the relatively recent works by concert music composers we refer to as new music. This idea of music making is important because it reminds us that music is a remarkably complicated collaborative process which connects human interiors. We can make only limited sense of the experience, and yet we can connect to music deeply and intimately. Notice the use of the word can here. I'm going to use that a lot because I'm less interested in saying, here's the way things are, or here's what should be, but more, how can we do this? How can it happen? I'm more interested in possibilities than pronouncements. So we fool ourselves if we think we can have definitive universal judgments about the essence of a musical expression, even though that's the impulse that we often have. Of course, there is a lot we can say about music, but much of it relies on the context and circumstances around what is left over after the music has happened, and may or may not be pertinent to the music as it is made and experienced at a later time. Such circumstances call for humility, for us to recognize the limits of our grasp of what just happened musically, whether we are composing, performing, or listening. They require our careful consideration when attempting to sort out the import or value of the music we are making. The moment of music making seems so transparent, and yet it is so ephemeral that we must exercise careful effort in order to think about it in a fair and reliable way. Also, it demands our collective consideration, because we each retain only a part of the whole experience. And so we must rely on one another if we hope to gain a relatively complete and balanced perspective on the music at hand. This reminds me of the fable about the 6 blind men and the elephant, if you recall that one in a little children's book where each blind man comes up to the elephant and one of them is feeling it and saying, oh, an elephant is sharp and pointed on one end. And another one is going, well, an elephant is like a large hairy wall. And another one is saying, well, an elephant is actually like the trunk of a tree. And someone else says, the elephant is like a snake. They all have a different perception of things. And when you put them all together, you get closer to the reality, but no one of them really has the big picture. I think we find ourselves in the same place when we come to music. Let's now turn to the word radical. We've talked about music long enough. Initially, I hesitated to use this word because that it might suggest what it might suggest about the sort of music that I might favor or prefer. My concern is less about matters of musical style or dialect or language than it is about the way we practice music making. In view of the complicated process of collaborative creation I'm describing, it seems unreasonable to think that I can benefit from or even understand music if I insist on being only a consumer. This happens, though, when I turn my attention chiefly to satisfying my personal musical needs or appetites or desires instead of apprehending the musical experience as a participatory sport. Contemplating the complexity of relationships in the music-making process prompts me to want to connect to others, to explore their perspectives as well as my own experience, and to discover new, savory, life-giving bits of truth, goodness, and beauty in the process. Insisting on belief in the legitimate right to individually held, relatively autonomous, and personally authoritative musical opinions gets in the way of this. It ultimately opens the door to an unbalanced, unrealistic connection to music and may serve to disconnect me from others who are sharing the same musical experience, which is exactly the opposite of what I would think and hope music can do for us. In our present consumer-oriented culture, then, it can be radical to believe that a responsibly humble awareness of my capacities and limits and willingness to question and answer for my own tastes can be the trailhead on a path toward more deeply communing with others around music. It can be radical to respond to music by seeking insight from others on the experience rather than embracing my initial response as trustworthy and accurate. It can be radical to accept the idea that some of my existing musical affections might be misplaced, naive, or unhealthy. And I'm sure my students wonder about that frequently. It can be radical to recognize that my affection for a piece of music or my distaste for it is relatively unimportant compared to the observations and responses I can exchange with other people in a spirit of limited, humble, collective discernment. It can be radical to think that my limited, incomplete perspective on a musical experience might be interesting or useful to other music makers. It can be radical to choose music not because I am confident that I will like it, but because I have reason to believe that my participation and exploration is worthwhile, that I might have things to learn, that I might grow in my practice of music making, or that I might commune more deeply with other people. This line of thought invites the idea, the third one, of pursuit, of seeking to grasp something we do not have, of believing that something or someone we don't yet fully understand is worth the persistent effort needed to sort it out, or him out. My use of pursuit here is about engaging in an ongoing process with no end in view, or actually with an end in view, but no intention of definitively and finally fixing the problems of musical culture. The pursuit I propose is that we foster and cultivate a radical transformation of the way we go about making music, oriented toward collectively exploring and discovering its power to connect and enliven us, to help us thrive in communities as human beings. Some of you may indeed be in pursuit like this already. And to you, I apologize for urging you toward what maybe you're already doing. My experience suggests, however, that we seldom find the time, place, or means to actually talk about our musical experience, to jointly explore our shared experiences. And often the conversation reaches an end when we identify our shared affections and differences. To say, oh, I liked that one. I didn't like that one. I've had a lot of conversations that ended with that kind of discussion about music. I suggest that we make this end, I like it, I don't like it, a beginning instead. If we're going to step beyond merely consuming musical artifacts and begin getting personally involved and relationally present in music making, exercising curiosity and wondering about significant matters of truth and goodness and beauty, we have some strenuous perseverance ahead of us to pursue that. For one thing, it's tempting to be satisfied with consuming music. I think I'm often very satisfied with that process. The music-making process I'm describing here involves a great deal of trouble and uncertainty compared to the simplicity of more immediate musical self-gratification. Music can be applied to a felt need, and it's exceedingly easy to get your ears on musical sound which meets desires in a moment. And in principle, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to enjoy music. But what if it's actually not good? How would I know in and of myself without the relational presence of others? Or what if I'm satisfying my appetite in order to kill time, or distract myself from having to face some other problem? Without being really and relationally present in the collaborative process of music making, I have limited access to the music itself and nobody to help me temper my outlook or find my way through it. Furthermore, we will need to grow in our ability to actually speak to one another openly and honestly about the experience of a musical moment. It is harder to describe the musical experience than it is to pronounce my own aesthetic judgment about it. I need to routinely foster my ability to listen to a fellow participant and consider their ideas without implicitly assuming that my ideas are better. If the goal involves communing with one another around the music, I have to cultivate habits of interaction which promote the collaborative venture of coming to terms with music and thus with one another. This brings into view once again the importance of humbly facing our limits, as well as the benefit of pooling ideas to better apprehend truth, goodness, and beauty in our shared musical experiences. Also, we may need to pursue habits of music making which don't sit well with the prevailing culture around us. This leads to a host of issues about authenticity, personal ethics, aesthetic choices, creative process, tension between economic utility and principle, and more, which we don't have time to really unpack here. The point of the pursuit I propose, of course, is to further explore and consider these issues in the context of a more radically curious participation in the music-making process. So, practically speaking then, how do we do this? Like other similar institutions, Belhaven's music department can have a profound, long-lasting impact on the pursuit of radical music making, and in so doing can further realize the university's own mission and vision. Through careful, focused, dedicated study and practice, music makers can cultivate their gifts in pursuit of a kind of music making which enriches people, draws them toward the truth, goodness, and beauty of God's being, and instills in them the tools and trajectory needed to continue this pursuit as part of their service to Christ Jesus in their careers, in human relationships, and in the world of ideas. There's the Belhaven the Belhaven mission poking its head out. Matters like economic viability and job readiness remain and are not unimportant, but they are pale concerned with the business of realizing, of making real the pursuit of radical music making by preparing talented people to lead the way. A more limited example of this pursuit is indeed the annual New Music Jackson Festival, which Belhaven's music department hosted a couple of weeks ago. The festival's express purpose is to cultivate a new music scene in the Jackson area, which largely does not exist. 3 other composers and I started the festival because we believe in the importance of promoting local cultural engagement with newly composed concert music. Admittedly, we have a certain amount of self-interest here, since this creates a context for us, our students, and our fellow composers in the Jackson area to present and hear new concert music, which is not prevalent in present-day culture, in part because of new music's reputation for experiment and innovation, for diverse and sometimes bewildering musical dialects. Part of my intent with the New Music Jackson Festival involves leveraging relatively unfamiliar music to encourage a more thoughtful, participatory engagement with music making. I also hope that new music might be increasingly preoccupied with truth, goodness, and beauty, even as it continues its diverse exploratory journey. The festival is not about proclaiming musical righteousness or exclusiveness, but rather about creating cultural space for practicing the radical pursuit I am proposing. Its impact is limited in the short run, but the goal is a long-term progressive cultural transformation. I have one last, more ponderous concern, and I suppose as a PhD I have to get philosophical, so here we go. I suspect that our commitment to knowing God is on the line and can be profoundly affected by how we approach music making. And I'm not putting music in the center to say exclusively this is it, but just to say this is an important thing as part of the fabric of our coming to know God. Faith in Christ calls us to step beyond what we think we need and begin to participate in the mystery of God's eternal purpose and divine being. Like the small arena of music making, the larger occupation of coming into intimate relationship with God can be described as a process of understanding the truth, goodness, and beauty which resides in him and which he reveals through the created order, which includes us, who are made in God's image and called to participate with him in his grand creative purpose. The pursuit of radical music making is a small part of pursuing God. Thank you for listening. I'm genuinely interested in the idea that this can, and I hope, leads to further discussion and exploration. That my ideas are not necessarily the end of the matter, but perhaps a little step on the way to actually figuring out what this is really about. So if you have comments or questions or want to talk about this now, I would be happy to entertain that for a bit. I don't know whether we have an official time when we get kicked out. Yes.
Well, one of the things that I noticed on your cute diagram was that it was linear, not cyclical.
Uh-huh.
But when you talk, you talk about it being like an ongoing thing, not I make the music and it goes. Am I?
And your question is?
Shouldn't
Shouldn't it be
Can
cyclical
you say
instead of
something
linear?
about that? Yeah.
Yes.
Is it cyclical or is it linear?
Oh, well, you'll notice there are no arrows going one direction or another. Yes, you can read it from left to right and say, well, the composer starts and then the performer and the listener. Sometimes that is the same person. You know, I sit down at the piano and play something out of my head, and I'm the only one who hears it because there's no one else around. And sometimes it's this big public thing. And yes, there's a sense that the composer is starting this. But at the same time, the composer is part of the listening public. You're involved in this music-making process, and you're constantly getting a sense of feedback. Especially if you pay attention to what listeners, what people are saying in response to music, especially if you can get them to actually say something in response to the music other than, oh, I liked your piece. Were you happy with the performance? It's supposed to be a kind of a give and take cycle, that there's things flowing both ways. Yeah. So you could probably draw that in a better way. But that's actually a picture like the pictures that I've drawn on the board for students in classes, saying, okay, this is what we're in for. If we're learning about the compositional process, realize that this is the point where it is, and here's how this kind of thing works. And start seeing your communal involvement in something which may feel like an isolated process. Does that help?
I think it's also distinctive that as a performer, you have a responsibility both directions. You have a responsibility to the composer to interpret the best as you can the ideas that they are trying to convey, most of the time for us on paper. And then you also have a responsibility to the listener to present not only accurately through your own lens, but then to receive back comment on how you were able to help them to hear the intent of the original person. So as a person that I consider myself in the middle, I feel responsibility both directions. I have to be aware both directions, whether the composer is alive or not. And, you know, whether the listener is listening to something, you know, that I'm not immediately present or producing, or.
And it's actually kind of awkward when you discover that, wait, the guy whose music I'm playing, or the girl, is gone. So I'm kind of stuck with performance practice, figuring this out. Well, how do people perform this stuff? And we start thinking about a whole practice of doing that, and realizing that the performer is actually a significant player in the compositional process, especially if you're involved in improvisation in some way. The composed idea of the jazz standard, for instance, is a very loose but focused thing. People can fall in love with the song, and they might be falling in love with a certain person's performance of it and not like someone else's performance of it. And we're involved in this conversation at least 3 ways. And it's dismaying when that conversation ends with a, well, I like this guy, but not that one, and we're done. You know,
And
he's so inventive and imaginative. It's like, well, what do you mean? What is he inventing and imagining? Is he really realizing the character of that song well? Well, what is the character of that song? And a lot of discussion can ensue, but we have trouble talking about it because we feel like, oh, I have to get technical if I'm going to do this. You know, and maybe we don't. The hardest thing I've found is getting students in class to be non-technical in their response to music, saying, you know, how does this make you feel? What's your response to this musical idea we're studying in theory class as a listener? And there's very often a kind of silence and an uncertainty. You know? And in fact, that's the point. We're talking about musical expression. The theory is just a way of getting at that. But the performer is a very important, significant part of that creative process.
I may need your help in formulating the actual question, but it's striking that music, unlike text, what we would consider text-based art, seems more influenced by the contextualization of the person experiencing it. And I'm thinking like the impact of Wagner, pre-Hitler, post-Hitler. Yeah, I'm wondering where the burden falls on the composer to try to limit the contextualization that a listener would experience, or on a listener to try to limit their own contextualization to get to the composer's intent.
I think I understand where you're going with that, in a sense. I tend to get upset, for instance, when I go to the art museum and see works of art that are entitled Untitled. You know, 'cause, like, oh, come on, at least talk to us a little bit about what's going on. Or we go to a dance concert and I hear this piece and it's got a very abstract title and it seems really hard to relate to what's actually going on the dance floor, and there's no program note, nothing to help make that, bridge that gap and get those hooks in there. And then I realized from my point of view as a composer, I'm doing things that may be really weird from other people's perspectives. Okay, Joe's nodding his head going, and so I have some responsibility to seek to promote conversation and relationship around that. Not so much to kind of limit what I'm doing, but maybe to focus it on the idea of I'm trying to commune with you and talk to you. But it's me trying to do it, so I can't just compromise my own ideas in order to make something that you would like. Then I'm just bowing to a different kind of consumerism. It's like, I want a relationship with you, so I'm trying to be present as who I really am, for better or for worse, and to try to bridge that gap. Well, if I can't have much of a conversation with people about something other than I liked this, I didn't like it, then the gap is harder to bridge, you know? And then the person from the other side, particularly looking historically, like you're talking about with seeing pre- and post-Hitler Wagner, we're talking about multiple contexts there and thinking historically about how people of the past who are largely dead and gone would be thinking about this music in different ways. And realizing that as a listener, I'm coming into an equation and I'm curious about the performer and the composer and where they're coming from. And if I'm just thinking, I'm coming from my point of view and bringing my baggage with this, and that's all that's important, then I'm missing part of the conversation. At the same time, it's me. I'm listening, this is my perspective, and I'm coming in and I'm saying this, and here it is. You know? So for someone to say, wow, that just sounded like a cat running up and down the piano, what in the heck are you doing? Is a legitimate question and a valuable question, because it challenges me to say, okay, let me figure out what I am doing. I don't know as a composer sometimes, but I know I'm doing something. And we begin to talk and think and realize there's a long process of sorting this out. But it changes the perspective from simply saying, okay, how do I need to limit myself, to how do I promote relationships between people that bridge the gap from someone else's perspective to mine and help us begin to understand and appreciate one another. And the music becomes part of this personal engagement that we have. And if I'm not willing to step into that and be relational and listen to someone else, and thus perhaps to say, okay, I'm going to limit myself here because I really want to connect to this other person, then we don't have anywhere to go. I like to go back again to this perhaps oversimplified idea of, well, I can be a consumer where I'm just taking this in on my own terms and either I like it or I don't. I'm not throwing aside that idea that I want to enjoy the process and engage with it, but saying my way to get deeper into that is to reach beyond it, to find out, well, other people have experienced this too. Why are we doing this music together? Why is this important? What are we getting out of it? The only answer to that question is to ask one another and to talk about it. And to stop thinking that, well, I need to listen in music appreciation class and just take the idea that was given to me, and either I like it or I don't, and if I don't like it, well, classical music is not for me, and I'll go listen to both kinds of music, country and Western, and everything. But rather, here's someone with a perspective, and they're telling me about this because it matters to them, and it mattered to the people who wrote the textbook and the people who composed the music and performed it, and keep it in the historical tradition so that we have it today after decades or centuries perhaps. There's something valuable here. What is that? I don't know. In fact, I'm sitting here going, I don't understand this. What is this about? Well, then I limit myself partly by just becoming humble and going, well, so I really don't understand. That's the place where I start in going toward understanding. So there's a lot behind the kind of question or idea that you're framing, and it's a very good one to be asking and thinking about. And the place that I go back to again is, can we work on relating to one another around the music-making experience? Which means I need to get past my own desire to just have whatever I like in front of me and end my conversation with that opinion, but rather begin to think, well, why do I like this? Is this really good? If God is working in me to form and shape my affections so that I'm growing to understand Him better and be more like Him, then I should be willing to subject my affections for music to that process of His formation. Which means I have to stop just thinking about what do I like and more thinking about what's actually good here, what's true and beautiful, what's worth pursuing, and how do I know if I don't interact with other people, if I don't have other reference points to challenge me out of my complacency and figure it out. Was that a longer answer than you needed?
It was a good answer.
We're still left with this idea of, so how do we do this? I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, we need to talk to one another, and this is hard. But sometimes getting into the process of trying and having an attitude where we're willing to try and willing to try it again means that eventually we might learn it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, is how are we going to do this? So your colleague in visual arts, Melissa Thorson, was in my office yesterday, and I have up on my wall Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son picture. And so just to get my money's worth, I said, Melissa, will you tell me about this picture? And so she stands up and looks at it and really gives me, a great 5 minutes on that picture, including who painted it. I did know that. But anyway, it's not so easy with music to do it real time. But one of the great experiences that Amy and I have had is a composer named Rob Capelau, who wrote Seussical the Musical, one of his lighter moments, but goes around the country doing these shows called What Makes It Great, where he takes parts of music and hires musicians to sing parts. So we've heard it with Sondheim, and we've heard it with Mozart, and we've heard it with Bernstein, but to really kind of go into the depths of some parts of the music and give one person's kind of opinion of what makes this outstanding. And it's been that kind of, and then after that to allow for kind of group discussion. So I'm thinking about this kind of how we could engage more and what it takes to really be able to, as a listener, to make music and be a part of that. And it's challenging. It requires some kind of particular structures to be able to do that, I think.
Yeah, it does. Part of the challenge with that is that when we put things in place like the Music Jackson Festival, we have the performances of these things and people are here, and we are doing some talking about music in general, but we're not creating the space for the conversation which actually engages us close to that moment. What would it be like if
that's
after
right.
every piece you stop and say, okay, let's talk about what you just heard. Did you read the program notes? Let's see, what kinds of responses do you have to this?
Right.
The Composers Forum has done this with their concerts at times. It's kind of not gotten too much further than, okay, we have 30 seconds for some responses and comments. What do you think?
Right.
And some of them have been really good and some very esoteric,
Right.
interesting moments. And that's the risk we run. But trying to move toward the idea that maybe if we prompt this, then as people are coming out of the concert hall, they're thinking about what people said and they're still close to the experience and may have some vivid memory of what just happened and can talk about it. And it's definitely from their point of view as opposed to just saying, well, I need to figure out why this is great. I need more of the stimulation that says, here's somebody who's doing something. I think it's important because they composed it and they're performing it. And what just happened? You know. So I'm
Well,
interested
and
in
music is
ways to
can
do
be
that.
so
Yeah.
overwhelming and so much coming at you
Mhm.
that Capelao takes it sometimes down to the phrase or even the measure.
Yeah, one little piece
Yeah.
can we unpack this little bit. And that's one reason I like to say very little about a piece of music if this is the first time I've heard it. You know, I go to a concert and hear a lot of stuff and it's like, I just need to sit and process for a while. And even then I can start to talk about it, but I just have more uncertainty. Like, can we hear this again? So I'm really glad that things get recorded and we can hear them again. But we very often do that with our headphones on without having any interference from other people.
I have a very unique experience in that I'm listening to someone learning your piece.
Huh. Or,
So
by the
then-
way, Friday,
Boy,
there's a concert
where are
of
you?
music that includes a new piece by mine played by Steve Socks.
So I am hearing it, you know, at not even half tempo. I'm hearing it slow motion in little tiny bits.
Yeah.
And then the bits start to have meaning. And then the bits start to link to each other. And now it's like, oh, this piece is starting to make sense. I'm looking forward to the performance where I get to hear the whole thing all the way through at tempo, and because I've experienced it before that, I think that would be incredible. But if that's the first time I will have heard it,
So,
I think it would go
Can you-
by and I'd have to do it again.
Yeah.
I'd have to do it again and again.
well, could you
before-
lead a post-concert discussion then about the experience of the piece to help people with it? We're out here in the reception. So what just happened?
Yeah, yeah.
And on Friday, there's going to not be just a couple of my pieces, but a big piece by one of our alumni composers that's almost 30 minutes of music on the presence of Christ. So big issues and lots of interesting things happening. And worth multiple listenings, and you get it once.
And he will be here also.
And
so
he
you
will
can
be
ask
here.
him questions.
So before the concert at 6:30, he and I are going to have a little pre-concert lecture in the instrumental rehearsal hall over behind the concert hall for anybody who wants to come harass us. Or just get their foot in the door to say, okay, what are we about to hear? What's going on? But all that goes back to,
What's that?
all that goes back to your point, which is very good. We need to still largely figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
And the things that we're doing don't necessarily do it. So how do we do it differently?
Well, one way we can do it is over caramel cake, so
Awesome.
thank you
For
for
coming, we have